This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Beneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. White Plains Week, what's happening, or the newsmakers, what's in store for the future. The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The old Citizen Net Reporter with you. And now, the stories of the historic week of February 7th, 2020. The United States Senate acquits the President of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Alan Dershowitz, for the defense, gives a brief for the ages. The result parallels the Andrew Johnson impeachment 152 years ago. Grid Properties briefs the Common Council on their 4 years in the making of the Boulevard project. George Latimer swings into action on 3 new issues, moving on from the Playland debacle in bankruptcy court. The county continues to tread water, extending decisions indefinitely on the airport, sewers, Medicaid, and a host of others. School budget process resumes Monday, and so far, no fixes on the Terrytown Road dangers of crossing the street. And some business coming up. Solar Symposium is coming up. The George Washington's birthday celebration and Youth Bureau's 50th anniversary gala is coming up. Five Guys named Mo wows Westchester Broadway Theater. Kirk Douglas, last of the film legends, dies at 103. And Lincoln weeps again. So now to the video newsreel, March of Time for February 7th. And there you see it, another one of those front pages for the ages. The New York Times of Thursday reporting of the clearing of President Donald Trump on each count in the final of a bitter impeachment battle. Now, here is the president. Next slide. Acquitted. And just as I thought he would, he held up the headline of the USA Today on Thursday evening at a rally. But the intriguing hero was this man, Alan Dershowitz, and he provided a tremendous argument that reinforced, in my belief, the Republicans could go with the decision, but he also provided a real insight on it. And let's go to the videotape and hear that.
Offering these arguments, I stand in the footsteps and in the spirit of Justice Benjamin Curtis, who was of counsel to impeach President Andrew Johnson, and who explained to the Senate that, quote, a greater principle was at stake than the fate of any particular president. And of William Evarts, a former Secretary of State, another one of Andrew Johnson's lawyers, who reportedly said that he had come to the defense table not as a partisan, not as a sympathizer, but to defend the Constitution. The Constitution, of course, provides that the Senate has the sole role and power to try all impeachments. In exercising that power, the Senate must consider 3 issues in this case. The first is whether the evidence presented by the House managers establishes, by the appropriate standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, that the factual allegations occurred. The second is whether, if these factual allegations occurred, did they rise to the level of abuse of power and/or obstruction of Congress. Finally, the Senate must determine whether abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are constitutionally authorized criteria for impeachment. The first issue is largely factual, and I leave that to others. The second is a combination of traditional and constitutional law, and I will touch on those. The third is a matter of pure constitutional law. Do charges of abuse and obstruction rise to the level of impeachable offenses under the Constitution? I will begin, as all constitutional analysis begins, with the text of the Constitution governing impeachment. I will then examine why the framers selected the words they did as the sole criteria authorizing impeachment. In making this return to the days of yesteryear is necessary because the issue today is not what the criteria of impeachment should be, not what a legislative body or a constitutional body might today decide are the proper criteria for impeachment of a president, but what the framers of our Constitution actually chose and what they expressly and implicitly rejected. I will ask whether the framers would have accepted such vague and open-ended terms as abuse of power and obstruction of Congress as governing criteria. I will show by a close review of the history that they did not and would not accept such criteria for fear that these criteria would turn our new republic into a British-style parliamentary democracy in which, let me give you...
How about that? That was really, I thought, one of a great explanation of why the impeachment was not, of why the Congress decided not to acquit Mr. Trump. It also parallels this case. Here's a picture of Andrew Johnson when he was impeached in 1868 and the Senate view at the time. And this very same issue came up that Mr. Dershowitz explained. And here is what he said about that.
Understand what I'm arguing is that purely non-criminal conduct, including abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, are outside the range of impeachable offenses. That is the key argument I'm presenting today. This view was supported by text writers and judges close in time to the founding. William Oldwell Russell, whose 1819 treatise on criminal law was a Bible among criminal law scholars and others, defined high crimes and misdemeanors as, quote, such immoral and unlawful acts as are nearly allied and equal in guilt to a felony, and yet, owing to the absence of some technical circumstances, do not fall within the definition of a felony. Similar views were expressed by some state courts, others disagreed. Curtis considered views, and those of Dwight, Russell, and others, based on careful study of the text and history, are not bonkers, absurdist, legal claptrap, or other demeaning epithets thrown around by partisan supporters of this impeachment. As Judge Starr pointed out, they had the weight of authority. They were accepted by the generation of founders and the generations that followed. If they are not accepted by academics today, that shows a weakness among the academics, not among the founders. These who disagree with Curtis's textual analysis are obliged, I believe, to respond with reasoned counter-interpretations, not name-calling. If Justice Curtis's arguments and those of Dean Dwight are rejected, I think then proponents of impeachment must offer alternative principles, alternative standards for impeachment and removal. We just heard that in 1970, Congressman Gerald Ford, who I greatly admired, said the following: in the context of an impeachment of a justice, an impeachable offense is whatever a majority of the House of Representatives considered it to be at a given moment in history, etc. You all know the quote. Congresswoman Maxine Waters recently put it more succinctly in the context of a presidential impeachment. Here's what she said. Impeachment is whatever Congress says it is. There is no law. But this lawless view would place Congress above the law. It would place Congress above the Constitution. For Congress to ignore the specific words of the Constitution itself and substitute its own judgments would be for Congress to do what it is accusing the president of doing. And no one is above the law, not the president and not Congress. This is precisely the kind of view expressly rejected by the framers, who feared having a president serve at the pleasure of the legislature, and it is precisely the view rejected by Senator James Grimes when he refused to accept an interpretation of high crimes and misdemeanors that would change according to the law of each senator's judgment enacted in his own bosom. The Constitution requires, in the words of Gouverneur Morris, that the criteria for impeachment must be enumerated and defined. Those who advocate impeachment today are obliged to demonstrate how the criteria accepted by the House in this case are enumerated and defined in the Constitution. The compelling textual analysis provided by Justice Curtis is confirmed by the debate in the Constitutional Convention, by the Federalist Papers, by the writings of William Blackstone, and I believe by the writings of Alexander Hamilton, which were heavily relied on by lawyers at the time of the Constitution's adoption. There were, at the time of the Constitution's adoption, two great debates that went on, and it's very important to understand the distinction between these two great debates. The first, hard to imagine today, but the first was, should there be any power to impeach a president at all? And there were several members of the founding generation and of the framers of the Constitution who said no, a president shouldn't be allowed to be impeached. The second is very, very important in our consideration today, is if a president is to be subject to impeachment, what should the criteria be? These are very different issues, and they are often erroneously conflated. Let's begin with the first debate. During the broad debate about whether a president should be subject to impeachment, proponents of impeachment used vague and open-ended terms such as unfit, obnoxious, corrupt, misconduct, misbehavior, negligence, malpractice, perfidy, treachery, incapacity, peculation, and maladministration. They worry that a president might, quote, pervert his administration into a scheme of speculation and oppression, that he might be corrupted by foreign influence, and yes, this is important, that he might have great opportunities of abusing his power. Those were the concerns that led the framers to decide that a president must be subject to impeachment. But not a single one of the framers suggested that these general fears, justifying the need for an impeachment and removal mechanism, should automatically be accepted as a specific criterion for impeachment. Far from it, as Gouverneur Morris aptly put it, corruption and some other offenses ought to be impeachable, but the cases ought to be enumerated and defined. The great fallacy of many contemporary scholars and pundits, and with due respect, members of the House of Representatives, is that they fail to understand the critical distinction between the broad reasons for needing an impeachment mechanism and the carefully enumerated and defined criteria that should authorize the deployment of this powerful weapon.
Now, moving on to other issues of the day. In the city this week, we had a Common Council meeting on Monday night, and what was striking about this Common Council meeting, that this man, a representative of Grid Properties, who has that big tract of land out on Maple Avenue across from the White Plains Hospital, came in front of the council to explain why his corporation wanted another site plan, and also was explaining why it has taken 4 years for them to get going on it. They have not done much on the property. He said significantly that they are very close to signing a major tenant that they have been working on for 3 years to get. And he has also said that the retail climate has changed significantly, so it's been very hard to get retailers to sign up. He also told the Common Council that they have no intentions of selling the property, something we have pointed out for a number of extended site plan situations in past shows. And he said, we don't do that. We own the property free and clear. There's no debt associated. There is no ration to sell it. And he was actually questioned by 3 council persons, a 4th too, and a 5th. This is unheard of. The Common Council actually questioning the developer? Good, keep it up, because they need to be questioned. But, of course, they didn't name any names of whom they were negotiating with, who they hoped to bring in. They didn't name the kind of stores they wanted for the retail. And the only question the council did not ask was, why is that stopping you from building the 17 townhouses that they're going to build on the Maple portion side? They don't need tenants for that are retail, they just have to build them. Now, question was not asked. I'd like to know that, but be that, I just want to know everything, right? And they don't want me to know things like that. So that was an interesting development. Now, next, let's discuss the Playland situation. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, last week actually, we learned of the denial of the judge to dismiss the Standard Amusements suit against the county and said the county had to go back and renegotiate with Standard Amusements because the judge felt that he didn't think the county's arguments that Standard Amusements was in breach of contract, and that's why they dismissed them. And so now they have to go back and renegotiate. Now on the radio, if we can have the slide back, on the radio on Tuesday mornings on the Good Morning Westchester show, George Latimer always does an interview with morning man Dennis Nardone on the left. And Dennis Nardone asked the county executive, well, what is happening with the suit on Playland? And George said that, well, that he was disappointed, and now we have to go back and renegotiate it. And he said on the air that Playland is likely to be managed by a private corporation. This is big stuff, because it means the county is probably going to work out some sort of settlement. And that will be interesting. Will Standard Amusements walk and for a big payoff from the county to forget about it? Or will they gain the lease that they had anticipated? We shall see, but that is significant that Mr. Latimer appears to be abandoning his feeling that he doesn't want to work with Standard Amusements. But that's what he said. So, but we asked the county to clarify that and what's ahead, and we weren't given any answers by the Department of Communications. You know, we ask, but they don't always tell us, ladies and gentlemen. What can I say? It's difficult answering good questions, isn't it? Now, moving along, let's take a look at what's ahead. The county is definitely having a problem making decisions. the county is holding off on a decision on the airport. Sewers. They're not talking. We haven't heard what Mr. Mike Kaplowitz has done when he's been sticking his head into the sewers on his study, and we also have not gotten any resolution to the airport situation. So right now those issues seem to be dragging on, which seems to be the style. And in fact, a new feature on the Westchester website is My Westchester, in which Mr. Latimer is now creating Westchester.com as his own news. And the news this week was that Mr. Latimer testified to state lawmakers that shifting Medicaid costs onto local government would destroy the Westchester County budget, and he was predicting a huge tax increase if that can't even pass. He said the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is partnering with Regeneron to develop a drug for the 2019 novel coronavirus, which is good. That's good. How long it'll take to develop that remains to be seen. He wants to Connecticut to drop the I-684 toll plan, urging Connecticut lawmakers to rethink a toll. And he's also scheduled public comment on Indian Point's closing. And he's invited people to comment. Now, this is a standard technique that Mr. Latimer uses. He gets lots of people to say what they want. Often, what they want is not really based in a lot of expertise. And that way, he can say that, well, the public didn't want this. It's very clever. But the point is, sometimes the public just makes a wrong decision, because the public always acts in its self-interest, ladies and gentlemen. Every individual always acts in its self-interest. Just look at Congress. And also, Mr. Latimer says they did a count of homeless people one night that were left out in the cold, and that was pretty disturbing. I think they found about 68 people. But this is the new style of news lately. The county tells you what they want to know, and it's mostly positive stuff to extol their achievements. But that county isn't the only one that's doing that. The city of White Plains is doing that, and it's just the new style. So the problem is they don't answer the questions that need to be asked. Now, the school budget is coming up on Monday night, and right now, based on the forecast that we told you about a couple of weeks ago on this show, they are looking at a $335 million budget for the next year. And that will sort of break even. But that means it's going up. What I predicted last year, they roll it over, another $7 million. But of course, school aid, whether that will remain the same or change, that there is absolutely no mystery. They've already said what their budget is going to be for the next 5 years in their forecast. And, you know, I'm disappointed that there is not even a nod to cutting school budget acceleration. And, but that is something people should be asking about. When your income goes down, you have to cut down. And everybody individually knows that. And this is something that, so it's Monday night at the Board of Education. They were going to discuss that, the instruction budget, teachers, the biggest part of the budget. And that will be coming up on Monday evening. And the city will begin their budget process. But I'm really, you know, I used to really hit the city hard on budgeting, but I have had an epiphany. White Plains is indeed the best managed government in the county and perhaps the state, because we do not spend past our income of the previous year. The county doesn't have a rule like that. That's why your taxes went up. And to my way of thinking, White Plains is doing a great job of the budget. I may not even pay attention to it this year because I know what to expect. Prudence, responsibility, and commitment to keeping the city functioning. And there goes it. Never thought, Mayor Roach, you never thought you'd hear me say that, but I'm saying it now. So keep up the good work on the finances and don't disappoint us. Now, let's look at some of the things coming up that I think are really important to pay attention to. The Solar Symposium was announced by Ben Boykin today. It's Wednesday, February 26, 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., and they're going to tell everyone in communities how to get into the solar race. The George Washington birthday celebration is taking place at the Purdy House, February 23rd, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. There's John Verperian with George Washington, the Michael Gallo, the living historian, who will do the celebration of the life of George Washington. It's a great event, and then finally there is the Youth Bureau. Youth Bureau highlighting their 50 years, founded 50 years ago, and it'll be on March 7th at 7 p.m. and it's at the White Plains Performing Arts Center. Give them a call, and it is something to be proud of. I don't know if we were the first Youth Bureau, but we're probably the most effective. And this week, Westchester Broadway Theater debuted a terrific new show. It is only in town for 1 month through March the 1st. It is well worth seeing. It is hot. It keeps you interested of toe tapping, jumping, jiving, and just enjoying some great songs from the Cafe Society era of the 40s. And these guys who play the five guys named Mo are just terrific. It's the best entertainment. Everybody gave them a standing ovation at the end, and they deserved it. Kirk Douglas died this week, and I call him the rebel because that's what he was. He was a rebel in life. He fought the big studios, and he played tough guys, and he was tough. There are just some of the movies, The Bad and the Beautiful. He's shown here in this clip with Lana Turner from that great movie. One of his greatest performances. Champion, Lust for Life, Spartacus, Ace in the Hole, and Paths of Glory. Just a few. Kirk Douglas. And here is a cartoon that was done after John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Bill Mauldin. And I think it is appropriate today for how we're feeling in America about where America is going. John Bailey, good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.